instruction. Today, we continue our webinar series on the foundational skills crisis, which highlights the results from interviews that here at Credo Education we have held with 50+ academic leaders nationwide, identifying the key challenges and opportunities for institutions like yours looking to resolve the skills gap. In today's second webinar of the series, we'll focus on building a solid gen ed program with Dr. Eli Collins-Brown and Dr. Stephanie Dance-Barnes of Winston Salem State University. They will discuss how they revamped their institution's gen ed program with an emphasis on foundational skills development. They're going to share how they used common rubrics, automated skills tagging, and a software workflow to support cross-gen ed comparison and feedback on foundational skills strengths, gaps, and instructional adjustment needs. So a lot to go over, and without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Eli and Stephanie.
Hey everyone, so I'm Stephanie Dance-Barnes.
And I'm Eli Collins-Brown.
And we're excited to be having this conversation with you and discuss our journey with Credo and our hopefully very successful attempt at integrating SLOs across our curriculum. And as you can see, we do have some outcomes here. So we'll give you a little bit about the history, talk a little bit about how we plan on implemented the project, some of the advantages of using a tag-based system for assessment across disciplines, looking at some of the challenges and opportunities that we've realized as a campus and how that process has gone, and also explain how faculty here at WSSU have formed student learning outcome committees and that structure. So as you see here, there's a poll. So we would like to have some insight on some of the barriers or challenges that you may have consistently encountered when it comes to accurately assessing student learning.
Great, so go ahead and answer your questions right onto your screen. We're just going to give it a second so everybody can log their answers. All right, so wow, it looks like we've got some great consistency. Everybody has seen lack of ownership, student participation, and inconsistent use of rubrics as a challenge. And about half the group said no cohesive embedding for instruction skills and assessment.
Yeah, so these are things that we felt at WSSU, so we had similar challenges, but we've been doing this for a while, so we also have some lessons learned that we would like to share with you. But let's go ahead and start at the beginning and tell you a little bit about the history of our SLO project.
So in regards to our student learning outcomes and how they were implemented, it's probably been about 7 or more years ago, we made the decision in regards to the direction of our general education. And then fast forwarding, we came to the conclusion as a campus that we wanted to address 7 essential student learning outcomes. And those are listed here for you as far as critical reading, thinking, information literacy, the oral communication, the quantitative literacy, scientific literacy, and written communication. And so that all sounds wonderfully great, but then the question becomes, how do we address the assessment of those student learning outcomes and integrating them across the curriculum? And so we began with adopting various rubrics. Usually, well, for the most part, we did utilize some of those that were already well established with ASCMU, and we had, I guess, SLO committees that actually work to fine tune some of those rubrics and make them more suitable for the campus. And then we went about utilizing those rubrics to hopefully begin assessing various courses. But then it was also the challenge of making sure that we had the various student learning outcomes integrated in select courses across the campus, at least on the front end from the general education perspective, those first 2 years. And so it was indeed a challenge making sure we had those courses acknowledged as far as which courses were aligned with the various outcomes, and then ensuring that the faculty knew which rubrics, the rubrics that they were utilizing and how to use them, and then actually going back and redesigning courses. So, I mean, it has been quite an endeavor. I don't know if Eli wants to chime in. She actually came on board a little bit later, but I think you see on this particular slide how I mentioned CETL. CETL at that point did help in the implementation to some degree, and that's our Center for Teaching and Learning. But it wasn't until very recently that we brought Eli on board, and now our Teaching and Learning Center is referred to as CITY, where they've actually taken a more aggressive role in helping lead the charge and having these student learning outcomes better integrated across the curriculum and how they're being assessed.
So some of our challenges with our old system way of collecting data on these SLOs. So basically, all of the courses in years 1 and 2 were assigned an SLO, and the responsibility of the faculty member was to use the rubrics to create an assignment and assessment and then assess that SLO. But then data was manually entered into a survey at the end of the semester. Our institutional assessment and research department hosted that survey. And then looking at the data accuracy was very questionable. It was unclear whether faculty were correctly using the rubric to assess students. There was no way of knowing if there was any consistency in the scoring of the rubrics, and the validity and reliability of the test scores are questionable because the way the data is collected and inputted. There still is a lot of floundering around about how to make the data actionable and who should take responsibility for the assessment. So, that feedback loop sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. And for faculty to be able to have actionable data saying, oh, okay, so the students didn't do very well on this SLO, so I need to go back in and look at my assignments and my assessments and see if I can improve that. There really was no cohesive embedding for the instruction, the skills, or the assessment, and no information available on demand about students and what they can do. So we had it was a first attempt at embedding the SLOs, getting faculty engaged in that for student learning, and then collecting that data. And we just found that there were some huge barriers and issues that we had. So we needed to find a new way. So we needed a more sophisticated system, especially since at our campus, we are not assigning an SLO to a discipline, but the SLOs are assigned across the campus, across disciplines. So, the complexity of that implementation is more robust than if we were just assigning an SLO to a discipline. We wanted to be able to automatically collect data. We knew that the response rates for faculty going in at the end of the semester and putting their data in was very low. So that brought into question the validity and reliability of the data. We needed to be able to have, we needed to have the ability to measure SLOs across disciplines. So being able to measure critical thinking in a writing course versus a biology course versus a health sciences course, which are very different animals, but to be able to have that consistent measurement. To be able to use various assessments. So not say, okay, everybody who's got the written communication, here's your assessment that you're going to use across all the courses and throughout all the years, which doesn't apply to what that particular course is teaching. So we needed to be able to use various assessments. We wanted it embedded in our learning management system so that we weren't sending faculty or students out to sign into a different system. It needs to be really easy for faculty to embed. It's like, I'm not sure what it's like at your institution, but we're continually working with faculty to use the LMS, even if they're teaching a full face-to-face course, to use the LMS to deliver content, engage with students, use it for assessments. And so we knew this needed to be a really low on-ramp for faculty to embed these modules into the LMS. And there's no use in doing this unless we can get good data that gets back to faculty, or faculty can use that data to improve the student success for these student learning outcomes. And then we also wanted to pull this data at all different levels. And I'll let Stephanie talk about that a little bit in terms of the different stakeholders in our university and what kind of data do these different stakeholders need.
So speaking from a faculty perspective, one of the difficult things was making sure that the rubrics were being used effectively. And I know there was, there was a lot of pushback in the beginning, and I think a lot of that was anxiety in regards to how to use the rubrics and how you were designing activities in the course. And then also that understanding of the student grade shouldn't really be associated with the assessment of these outcomes. And so there was all sorts of, I guess, misinformation that was out there in the universe. And so for the faculty, we really wanted to have an idea of engaging or understanding how the students were performing over time. And so, as I said, when we initially started this, we started looking at this from a general education perspective. So what's going on within those first two years, but then looking at it through across, once the students got within their majors, how were they growing and how effectively as faculty were we helping the students with these specific skills as it related to these student learning outcomes. And so if we kind of step back a little bit within a course, what we also wanted, what would also be a benefit to faculty in real time, is to be able to see weaknesses. So we needed to go back and revisit certain skills or certain aspects of an outcome, we could, because we can gauge in real time how the students were performing, whether it's a class or even on an individual basis. So it really allowed us to, it would really allow us to more effectively adapt how we were responding to how students were performing within a particular course. When we look at from the departmental and the college level, like I said, it became how is this going to be drug across the major? So on the front end, we were mainly focusing on those first 2 years, but then it becomes a campus-wide effort to identify courses that were going to be aligned with certain outcomes. And then how are we going to be able to assess and make sure that it's being consistently done? And so coming up with an innovative tool to do so was necessary. And Credo really provided us with the ability to start moving towards that. So the hope and the goal is, and we're still working towards that, is having departments and majors across the college going back and basically backward designing their curriculum and making sure that those outcomes are aligned. And then as a university, we could better identify where those modules and where Credo can be embedded so that we can better assess and track student learning. And from an institutional perspective, I think Eli could speak more to that, but we want to make sure that the data that we're generating, what is it going? Where is it going? And I can say from a faculty perspective, this first few years, we were putting data in. I'm not sure how consistently it was being put in and where was it going and what were we doing with it. And so I'll kind of let Eli take over in regards to the institutional piece.
And so really engaging with our institutional assessment and research department is critically important because, of course, they're going to use this data for accreditation, and we've got our SAC-COC reaffirmation coming up in 2020. So, it's really a key time right now. And so if we can pull data from the LMS into Credo, and Credo can then serve data out to these specific different audiences. So, a dean could look at how the college is doing on the student learning outcomes. The provost office could look at it from the provost perspective, but then institutional assessment and research can pull the data that they need for the accreditation reports in our reaffirmation report. Some of the things that are nice is that within Credo, you can build in formative and summative assessments. So, there can be some concepts that are given to students in the module, and then they can do some practice assessments that really give the student an idea of whether they understand the concepts or not. And then, the summative evaluation towards the end of that course then really gives the faculty an idea of whether the students have achieved the student learning outcome at that level. And Credo is really helping us do that. The nice thing about it is students do all of their work in Canvas, so there's no data loss in the reporting of, relying on faculty to go into a survey and report that data out. And validity and reliability can then be determined. With the modules, we get more consistent data across faculty too. So, the reliability or consistency of faculty assessing the same SLO is definitely increased by using Credo to do this. So,
and I would also say from an institutional perspective, it helps with understanding and identifying how to deploy resources. So when we're talking about if there are certain areas where we find weaknesses, we can start various initiatives to support that. Like in the past, we saw extreme or some deficiencies as it related to writing. So we were able to focus in on that. And right now, we're trying to have guidance as to where our next QEP will go. So having this data is vital to making sure that we're deploying resources in the most effective way that's going to allow for our students to be most successful.
So I'm going to let Stephanie take over to show a real life example because she's sort of our star faculty member. She was our first faculty to work with Credo to actually embed Credo into one of her courses.
And I'm just going to quickly go through this. This course was really designed, it was a call at that time. We were moving towards integrating these student learning outcomes across the curriculum. And at that time, one of the outcomes that we did not have a lot of courses with it being attached was information literacy. And particularly in the biological sciences, a lot of the courses were aligned with scientific literacy. But for me, I felt not just for our science majors, but for all of our students, information literacy is so vitally important. And so it became, for me, I guess a challenge to develop a course that would address those skills that were aligned with information literacy. And when we look at some of the benefits of integrating information literacy, particularly in a biological sciences course, we wanted our students to be more aware and understand the importance of scientific literature, better understanding some of the scientific papers. We're getting students at their senior year that had never really teased and developed the ability to synthesize information and understanding how that that whole idea of gathering information and being able to utilize it effectively. And so we felt like we need to back up and make sure that they were seeing these skills early on. And so we felt that this will make stronger students. And if you think about information literacy, for me as a scientist, it really does align quite well with the scientific method or search methods that we see in the sciences. And so information literacy just seemed like a good fit. And the other piece was, for me, it was not even necessarily about content. It was about the skills, and then the content would come. And so a lot of times when you're doing endeavors like this, that's where you get the pushback, because everyone has to get across this content. But with information literacy in particular, if students develop these skills, the content will come. And so it became designing a course that had authentic forms of assessment that would allow me the ability to assess the students' achievement of these various skills. And the course that I developed was Bio 2304, which is Science of Investigation of Diseases. It was actually based on the show House, which is no longer running right now. I think it was in reruns. But at the time, that for me, that was one of my favorite shows. And to me, it just totally spoke to what information literacy was, like understanding that you had a problem, but where do you go to find the information to figure it out? And then once you have that information, what do you do with it and how do you apply it? And so for this particular course, I tried to make sure it was scaffolded, where along the way, the students were being introduced to the information by me, or the particular skills, whether it be through activities, eventually where it's modeled and we work together. They do cooperative things that then by the end of the course, they're applying, or not even by the end of the course, but throughout, because we would do activities throughout, but the goal was for them to be able to apply those skills to some project, some capstone experience in the course. And so it came in the form of them being able to present their scenario findings, because during this course, they will be presented with their pseudo patient that had a disease, and they had to figure out what was wrong with this patient. And they would be given certain preliminary information by me, and then it became, well, what does this mean? What do I need to know? Where are the gaps? Where do I need to find this stuff? And so by the end, you have biology majors, non-science majors that were in class talking science, talking medicines, talking all these foreign terms that they had no idea what they were beforehand, but now they could do it in an effective and intelligent way. And so one thing that I always try to point out is that this course has no textbook. And if you think about information literacy, the students were generating all of their information. So from that regards, it was a very cost-effective course, and the students loved it because they didn't have to buy a textbook. But as you can see, when you look at the outcomes for the course, it's totally aligned with information literacy. And the activities were designed around that. And so what became really great, and it was a few years in of me teaching this course, somehow, and I don't even know how it happened, we came upon Credo, and we started working with these guys. And it's like, you know what, we can design modules that are based on the various outcomes or standards related to information literacy, and we can identify how well your students are or have mastered these skills. And so that was wonderful, because then it became an opportunity for me to embed these modules. At that particular time, it was in the form of a Blackboard, integrated in Blackboard. Previously, that's what we used. We've now since gone on to Canvas, but the good thing was it integrates into both, and so that was no issue. And so essentially they were able to utilize my syllabus to design course to design modules and activities that were specific to my course. Yet they were still user-friendly enough that if we needed to integrate it into another information literacy course, it could be adjusted. So it was just really a wonderful, customizable platform that allowed us to assess the, in my case, information literacy. And the types of activities we would see, or the students would encounter, would be videos, tutorials, quizzes. So they were engaged in a lot of different ways within these modules. And like I said, it was at that time embedded in Blackboard, and we've since moved into Canvas. But this is just an example of what my dashboard looked like in my Credo. In my Credo login, and I could see, for instance, this is, which lesson is this? Academic integrity, that particular lesson, and I can look at the class and see how well they're doing in a certain area. And so when we're looking at the academic integrity, which is the one I have highlighted, and I think that's bar number 3, if I'm looking at this correctly. Yes. Or is it the last one? My mouse isn't working. But as you can see, I'm sorry, it's bar number 2. I'm on point now. So it's bar number 2, and looking at the activities they did that were associated with academic integrity, the blue bar represents how many students or what percentage got a certain amount correct versus incorrect. And you can see that they did exceptionally well on the academic integrity module. If you look at one of the inquiry models, you know, they did pretty well, but I just have that one where the actual stats are up for you. And it's actually set up so you can look across at the different activities. This is one, the evaluation criteria, and that's where students usually have a more difficult time. And you can see it's almost, you know, half and half where the class got it or didn't get it. And so by me seeing this, I would actually go back and readdress how do you evaluate sources? How do you critically evaluate them and determine their relevancy, and if they're good sources or if there's a bias there? So from that regard, it's very beneficial. This part of my dashboard is actually going in and showing you individual questions, so you can actually drill down and look at individual questions, individual students. So it really allows you to address things in real time. So if there are some barriers or some issues, you can, like I said, address them in real time, and you know how your class is performing. So the overall goal for our university, as we've moved towards redesigning our curriculum, where we have a foundation, breadth, and depth, and how we want our learning outcomes integrated throughout our foundation, breadth, and depth. We want to see it at the course level, where we're able to evaluate and accurately assess what's going on, so that we can do a better job of interpreting how our students are performing at the course level. And then at the departmental level, it can guide initiatives within the department, so we want to assess in that regard. And then also at the institutional level, and at all levels, Credo is a part of that process, whether at the course level, as I just showed you, where the faculty member can actually in real time gauge how their students are doing. The department can then use that data from the various courses, and then all of that information can then be pulled at the institutional level, so it can, like I said previously, drive some of our institutional initiatives. And so, not to spend too long on this particular slide, but as we began to gather information and moving towards more the present and where we are, we had made the determination that we would actually focus more on critical thinking and written communication as we work to integrate Credo across institutionally, because we felt on the front end would just be too difficult to look at all of the SLOs all at once at an institutional level. And so and Eli's going to speak to that shortly, how we've had SLO learning communities that have worked to drive those efforts. And so that's kind of where we are now. And I'm going to turn it over to Eli.
So when we initially got started back in 2011, faculty formed faculty learning communities to examine, explore what these rubrics were about, how to best design some assignments and assessments. They wrote a guidebook for each of the SLOs. But coming back and actually working with Credo to implement Credo into the courses with the SLOs, we decided that we needed to reassemble them and turn them into committees, actually at the request of the faculty, because they could report service on committees on their annual reports, whereas participating in a faculty learning community didn't pack the same punch or be counted the same as serving on a committee. So we reorganized them as committees, and we're focusing really on written communication right now as sort of our initial pilot for incorporating Credo across the curriculum. So that committee got together. They reaffirmed that they liked the value rubric, the AAC&U value rubric. They did make one addition to the value rubric, and I don't remember exactly what that was, but they felt that they needed additional criteria. The committees are responsible for approving the basic module and the assessment. So the committee actually has been working with Credo to design that basic module, or to use one of the existing modules and modify it as needed. And then inserted that module into targeted courses, not all the courses that had written communication, but just targeted courses assigned this semester. And then we will assess how that goes at the end of the semester. Going forward, we're going to hopefully, well, we know that things will go smoothly with written communication, so we're going to use the same model. And in spring, we'll put in critical reading, critical thinking, oral communication, and information literacy will be broadened out to more courses. And the reason that we're able to do this is because Credo is a tag-based system, and the advantages of using a tag-based system is that you can use different types of assessments to assess the same SLO. So as we talked about, that you wouldn't want to use the same assessment in a freshman level course that has written communication. And actually that's a power outage. Sorry, we just had a power outage, so it's a good thing. Hopefully our wireless is still going. So you wouldn't want to have give the same assessment at a freshman level that you would want to give at a senior level, because those value rubrics really assess across the life of the student. And so this tag-based system allows us to do that. And it's all underneath. So it's nice that Credo does the tagging. Our faculty don't have to worry that they're using the right tags. And then, like I said, the tag assessments from different disciplines allow us to measure the same types of outcomes. I think maybe we got lost. Can you guys still hear us?
We can hear you, and we're still seeing your screen, so it looks like Wi-Fi is still up.
Okay, good, because yeah, we're in a dark room now since we had a power
Yeah,
outage.
we apologize for the beeping.
Yeah.
We think it's something that needs to be reset.
Something's trying to
Is
reboot.
this I don't know. I don't think we're seeing the right screen.
So this is actually a reflection question from the written communication module. Just to give you an example, this pops up within Canvas. It gives you an example of how they pulled from the value rubric. They're focusing on drawing connections. It is a written response instead of a multiple choice question. So part of the training for faculty is also to be able to go in and grade those written responses. This is the value rubric. So you can see how the value rubric connects to the question in the Credo module. The tags, and I can't say. So Credo did a great job with the tags on the rubric in terms of that this tag is context and purposeful writing, but the faculty and the students don't see that particularly. It's not totally evident in the assessment. So faculty and students can just focus on actually learning the principles of written communication and demonstrating that. Here's an example of a multiple choice question for the written communication module. It's kind of funny because those of us who are working on this module actually went through this module, and 3 of them are writing instructors, and I don't think any of us did very well. So that was like, oh, well, maybe we need to go back and look at the module, because if it's too hard for us to do well, then maybe it might be too challenging for the students. But then here's the rubric again, and how this question, this multiple choice question, is tagged to really look at the genre and disciplinary conventions of writing. So we're just, to recap, this was our old system where data was entered manually. We didn't have a cohesive way of embedding instruction. The reliability and validity was really questioned. I mean, we knew that we were comparing not just apples with oranges, but apples with T-bone steaks. That's how far apart the data was. A lack of clear ownership with the faculty learning communities, which prompted us to go to the committee structure. Really low response rates in terms of it's the end of the semester, faculty are just racing to get finals done, grades put in, and now we're asking them to report this data. So we think that also contributed to the low response rates, and we really saw an inconsistent use of the rubric. So you hand a rubric to a faculty member, they're going to use it to assess an assignment, and that's not really the intent of the value rubrics. And so there needs to be some more instruction on how to do that, and I think Credo is going to help us do that. So here's our vision for partnering with Credo that we've gotten a good start on. That Credo allows us to assess reliability and validity and determine that. It automatically collects data, which faculty love. They're not going to have to report in that survey at the end of the semester. The value of tracking students' data over time, and for students to be able to track their own data too, so they can see how they've progressed, we can see how they've progressed, as well as identify those trouble spots. If a student hasn't achieved an appropriate level in one of the SLOs, then we can catch up with that student. Obviously, consistency in scoring, because it's tagged and scored through the module. We have the ability with Credo to do content-specific assessments that we're really looking forward to as we pull the SLOs up through the majors. So it's not deploying the same module across the disciplines at the 3rd and 4th year level, but really being able to say, okay, for this SLO in this course, let's create an assessment that is really specifically tied to the content covered. And then probably the most valuable thing is that we've got live interactive data that's available on demand through the dashboards at multiple different levels of the institution, from the faculty level, soon the student level, right up to provost level and institutional assessment and research. I don't think there's any other system that could do this for us. So there's great value in that.
So that's about all that we have, and it's just an introduction to really what is the start of our journey. The good thing for us is we have really good buy-in from our administration, which is really driving a lot of these efforts and also working very hard to ensure we're doing everything possible to make sure that we have faculty buy-in, staff buy-in, and even our students, so they have an understanding of what we're trying to do and how it's important to them as well.
Yeah, so you guys have any questions?
Thank you both. Let me just take a look at the questions. Would you have any tips for a school that's looking to start off implementing a similar strategy?
We were just having these conversations earlier. In fact, we have these conversations every time we're together. But, you know, looking at things reflectively, I mean, for sure, one, you have to make sure that you have buy-in from all areas and that you're not working in silos, because that's where the frustration comes in. You want to make sure that everyone's at the table, everyone knows what the ultimate outcome and goal is, and identifying specific roles. And you probably want to make sure that you're investing in individuals to help lead the charge, to make sure that that there's proper oversight. And so I know that that's a big piece.
Yeah, and I would say maybe we've talked a lot about, we have 7 SLOs. That's probably too many SLOs. So you might also want to be very intentional about how many SLOs you want to try to measure. Faculty buy-in is incredibly important. Where we found things sort of fell apart was that transition from the faculty learning communities, which was really a voluntary type of thing. We invited all the faculty that were teaching a course with that SLO assigned to it. And so they came as part of the faculty learning community. But then if the next semester they weren't teaching a course assigned to that SLO, then they wouldn't come to the faculty learning community. So that's also part of the reason why we formed committees, and we're asking for a 2-year commitment to that committee so that we can have some consistent attendance and input and some continuity in terms of leadership and ideas. Being able to either give the chairs of the committee or the people who participate in the committee a stipend or some sort of course buyout or something, because this is not easy work, and it's very time intensive to get something like this started. And so you really need to support the faculty and staff that are working on that. And then having just somebody take ownership for it. Right. I think they thought that these faculty learning communities were going to take ownership of it, and some did really well, and others just kind of floundered. So,
but just to piggyback on the effort, everyone has to understand the front end. It's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of heavy lifting on the front end, but it's going to make it so much better on the back end. Faculty has to understand that it might take redesigning some things with your courses, and there has to be oversight to make sure that the outcomes that are aligned with courses are correctly aligned and things are being properly assessed.
Yeah.
And this is sort of a similar question, but I guess phrased in a bit of a different way. Were there any challenges that came up that surprised you, or anything that you weren't expecting that would be good to prepare for?
The student buy-in is going to be important. One, and then also the course design and how you're integrating the modules, because you don't want the students to feel like you're giving them busy work, and you want to make it like a meaningful integration. So I think for me, being one of the first to pilot some of this stuff, in the beginning, I think for the students, it may have came across as, oh, is this busy work? Like, what is this? But making sure that you're definitely being intentional about how you're doing or how you're integrating the modules into your courses. I think that was like the biggest surprise for me, not thinking that part through.
And the work that we've been doing now with faculty is, I think it's realizing that the SLO isn't separate from your course learning objectives or your course learning outcomes, but it actually needs to be integrated as part of that. So I would look over syllabi that would have, 7 learning outcomes that were very disciplinary based, very content based, and then an entirely different paragraph would be, oh, and this course is assigned the critical thinking SLO. And that, it just, in order for it to be embedded, critical thinking needs to be expressed within the content, course objectives or course outcomes. So that was sort of a surprise that somewhere along the way that message wasn't conveyed.
Well, it looks like those are all the questions we have for today. So I want to thank you again, Stephanie and Eli. This was very helpful and interesting for everyone. So we greatly appreciate you speaking with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting us to speak. We're happy to share our story.
Great. And for the folks listening in, if you enjoyed this session and would like to continue on through our webinar series, we do have webinar 3 coming up on Thursday, October 25th. We'll be speaking with Trent Moorbutter, who is the Vice President for Instruction and Chief Academic Officer at Nash Community College. He's going to share how Nash invested in teaching its teachers and the boosts to enrollment, retention, and graduation rates that followed. So I hope to see you there. And as a reminder, there will be a recording of this webinar shared within 24 hours. You'll see a short survey pop up on your screen directly after this session and via email if you don't have the time to complete it now. So we hope to see you soon, and thank you again for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.